What if the glamour of Hollywood's golden era hid something far less elegant? Something no camera could capture, but everyone on set noticed. Beneath the perfume, lighting tricks, and carefully controlled images, there were whispered complaints and quiet adjustments made behind the scenes. Studios managed it silently. Co-stars endured it politely. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of classic Hollywood's most uncomfortable open secrets, one the history books never mention. Joan Blondell. Joan Blondell was adored for her quick wit, sharp delivery, and no-nonsense attitude. At Warner Brothers in the early 1930s, she was seen as one of the studio's most reliable stars. But behind the camera, there was another reputation attached to her name one never mentioned in fan magazines. Joan smoked constantly, sweated heavily under hot studio lights, and had little interest in masking it. Crew members joked that filming with her felt less like acting and more like surviving a workout. Heavy pre-code costumes trapped heat, and deodorant use was far from universal. Windows were opened, sets were aired out, wardrobe quietly rotated outfits more often than usual. Joan didn't deny any of it. She reportedly argued that men were allowed to stink of whiskey and tobacco, so she saw no reason to apologize. In an era when daily bathing wasn't standard, her habits stood out even more. Her career never suffered, but among makeup artists and grips, her name carried a footnote. Hollywood could sell anything on screen, but it couldn't deodorize reality. Ruth Roman. Ruth Roman had elegance, height, and a voice that made her perfect for tense thrillers and femme fatale roles. During the filming of Strangers on a Train in 1951, however, attention shifted away from her performance and toward something far less cinematic. Crew members whispered about a strong, persistent body odor that worsened during stressful scenes. This wasn't fresh sweat, it was described as something layered, stale, and made worse by perfume. Wardrobe reportedly washed her costumes more frequently, and assistants quietly avoided close proximity when possible. No one confronted her directly. Ruth was known to be aloof, and Hollywood didn't challenge rising stars over personal habits. Farley Granger never addressed it publicly, but later hinted that the shoot had its challenges beyond Hitchcock's intensity. Despite talent and opportunity, Ruth never reached the stardom many expected. Official explanations blamed charisma or timing. Off the record, those who worked with her suggested another factor, one that couldn't be corrected in the makeup chair. Jan Sterling. Jan Sterling embodied the sharp-edged allure of film noir. Blonde, confident, and emotionally fearless, she made a strong impression in Ace in the Hole. But behind the scenes, that polish reportedly faded fast. Under the New Mexico sun, long shooting days exposed habits Jan didn't seem interested in changing. Kirk Douglas later referenced her particular ways, a carefully worded comment widely understood by those in the industry. Crew members avoided standing too close. Billy Wilder allegedly ordered extra breaks, not for fatigue, but for air. Strong perfume attempted to mask the problem, but only made it worse. Daily hygiene simply wasn't universal in the early 1950s, but even by those standards, Jan stood out. She appeared unaware or unconcerned. Her career remained steady, but never soared. Casting offices never documented the issue. They didn't need to. Hollywood memory is long, especially when discomfort is involved. Eleanor Powell. Eleanor Powell was Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's most disciplined dancer, a performer whose physical precision bordered on obsession. Her technique was flawless, her stamina unmatched, and her rehearsal schedule punishing even by MGM standards. But that relentless commitment came with an unspoken cost. Powell often rehearsed for hours without removing her shoes, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in tightly fitted tap shoes that trapped sweat and moisture. Over time, the buildup became impossible to ignore. Crew members whispered that the odor lingered long after rehearsals ended. Orchestra musicians reportedly requested breaks, not from exhaustion, but from the air itself. Fred Astaire, known for professionalism above all else, never commented publicly, but later admitted privately that dancing alongside Powell was a sensory challenge. The issue wasn't carelessness, it was priority. Eleanor focused entirely on performance. Hygiene came second. The props department allegedly had standing instructions to ventilate her dressing room daily, a courtesy extended to no other star. When Powell retired from film in 1945, the official explanation was personal life and changing priorities. Unofficially, technicians joked that the studio could finally breathe again. Her legacy as a dancer remains untouchable, but behind the scenes, her perfection had a smell no one forgot. Andrea Leeds. Andrea Leeds appeared poised for stardom after her acclaimed performance in Stage Door in 1937. Sharing scenes with Hollywood's elite should have propelled her career forward, but instead, whispers followed her off set. Co-stars quietly complained about persistent body odor during rehearsals and scenes requiring close proximity. The issue wasn't occasional. It was consistent enough that it became an unspoken understanding among crew members. Leeds came from a conservative background where frequent bathing was discouraged, believed to be unhealthy. Those habits carried into her professional life. Seamstresses reportedly noticed visibly soiled undergarments during fittings, prompting immediate laundering of costumes after each use. Katharine Hepburn, never known for subtlety, allegedly requested better air circulation rather than confronting Leeds directly. No one wanted to embarrass a rising actress, especially one backed by studio expectations. But momentum stalled almost immediately. Roles dried up. Opportunities faded. Andrea retired quietly in 1942, marrying well and leaving Hollywood behind. Publicly, it appeared to be a personal choice. Privately, many believed the industry exhaled with relief. Talent had never been the issue. Comfort was. Nancy Carroll. Nancy Carroll was once Paramount's brightest investment, a performer with charm, musical ability, and mass appeal. On screen, she radiated refinement. Off-screen, a different story circulated quietly. During demanding productions, Carroll reportedly suffered from chronic bad breath and noticeable body odor, problems worsened by constant smoking and poor oral care. Co-stars endured romantic scenes politely, but several requested that takes be kept short. Makeup artists layered powder and perfume in an attempt to mask the problem, but nothing fully worked. Directors grew cautious. Intimate scenes became less frequent. Casting choices shifted subtly. No memos were written, no conversations recorded. By the mid-1930s, Nancy's career began to slide. Official explanations cited contract disputes and changing studio priorities. Unofficially, the discomfort had become a liability. Hollywood tolerated many flaws, but physical proximity was unavoidable on set. By 1938, Carroll had quietly exited the industry. Her name faded into footnotes, remembered less for her talent than for the reason people avoided standing too close. Helen Hayes. Helen Hayes entered Hollywood crowned as Broadway royalty. Expectations were high, but film crews quickly noticed something that clashed with her pristine image. A musty, stale odor often clung to her clothing, the result of wearing personal garments repeatedly without frequent laundering. In an era when laundry was labor-intensive, the buildup became noticeable fast. Wardrobe departments discreetly aired out and disinfected her costumes after every use, an unusual measure reserved only for her. Gary Cooper, her co-star in A Farewell to Arms, never complained publicly, but privately endured romantic scenes with polite distance. Hayes didn't stay long in Hollywood. By the mid-1930s, she returned to theater, where physical distance between performers made the issue less relevant. On stage, her reputation remained flawless. On film, it quietly faded. Hollywood didn't mourn her departure. Gail Storm. Gail Storm represented the idealized image of wholesome American charm. Bright smile, approachable presence, and an effortless ease that worked perfectly in light comedies and later on television. But behind the scenes, that polished image had a complication few wanted to address openly. Storm reportedly avoided deodorant entirely, a choice that became noticeable under the intense heat of studio lights. During physically demanding scenes running, dancing, repeated takes, the problem intensified. Closed sets required constant ventilation. Crew members quietly scheduled breaks, not for exhaustion, but for air circulation. It wasn't subtle. The odor lingered, clinging to costumes and furniture, long after scenes wrapped. Directors learned to plan her shoots carefully, avoiding long takes in confined spaces and grouping her scenes strategically to minimize discomfort. In the studio system, confrontation was avoided whenever possible. Storm remained popular, especially as television rose in the 1950s. Shorter takes, cooler environments, and physical distance made the issue easier to manage. Film sets, however, were far less forgiving. Her success never disappeared, but proximity became something everyone quietly accounted for. Nothing was written down. Nothing was discussed publicly. It was simply understood. Joan Leslie. Joan Leslie entered Hollywood at a young age, shaped by a conservative upbringing that hadn't prepared her for the physical expectations of studio life. Daily bathing wasn't emphasized in her household, and those habits followed her onto set. Under heavy costumes and unforgiving lights, body odor became noticeable, especially during long shooting days. Makeup artists attempted to compensate with perfume. Wardrobe rotated outfits more frequently. None of it addressed the root of the issue. Crew members whispered, careful not to embarrass a young actress still under contract. Joan wasn't defiant or careless. She simply didn't realize the standard expected of her. Studios had departments for image, posture, and speech, but hygiene conversations were considered too personal. As the years passed, the problem remained unresolved. Warner Brothers didn't renew her contract with much resistance. Officially, it was business disagreements. Unofficially, there was little enthusiasm to fight for her return. Joan continued working sporadically, but the momentum was gone. The issue was never recorded, never acknowledged publicly, and never denied. It lived only in memory, among those who stood too close. Jane Wyman. Jane Wyman was respected, disciplined, and far too valuable for studios to confront directly. During periods of intense stress, professional pressure, personal upheaval, crew members noticed lapses in hygiene. The issue wasn't constant, but when it appeared, it was noticeable. Studios handled it quietly, assigning assistants who monitored schedules and routines without explanation. Gregory Peck, always courteous, reportedly maintained physical distance off camera. No one complained publicly. No one needed to. Wyman's talent outweighed the inconvenience. Her career continued to flourish, awards followed, and her reputation remained intact. Still, among those who worked with her during those years, the memory lingered. Hollywood remembered everything, even what it refused to document. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead never pretended to care about convention, and that extended far beyond her performances. Known for excess in every direction, her lifestyle became inseparable from her reputation. Long nights blurred into early mornings, filled with cigarettes, alcohol, and little regard for routine. During heavy drinking periods, personal hygiene reportedly disappeared almost entirely from her priorities. Bankhead didn't hide it, didn't excuse it, and certainly didn't apologize for it. Co-stars learned quickly that endurance was part of working with her. Some tolerated it. Others simply kept their distance whenever possible. Directors adapted rather than confronted her, blocking scenes to minimize proximity or shortening takes when necessary. Hollywood tolerated Tallulah because she was Tallulah brilliant, unpredictable, and impossible to replace. The behavior wasn't seen as a flaw to be corrected, but as part of the persona itself. When proximity became overwhelming, people quietly stepped back. No arguments, no complaints. Bankhead noticed, and she didn't care. Her presence was commanding enough that discomfort became secondary. In an industry built on illusion, Tallulah refused refinement. What remained was a legend that carried its own atmosphere, one that lingered long after she left the room. Clara Bow. Clara Bow became a lightning rod for gossip almost the moment she arrived in Hollywood. Her rapid rise during the silent era placed her under constant scrutiny, and nothing about her life escaped comment. Long shooting days under primitive conditions only fueled rumors, especially during physically demanding productions that required repeated takes and heavy costumes. Crew members whispered about hygiene issues, though no one ever addressed them publicly. Whether exaggerated or not, the rumors followed her relentlessly. Studios worked overtime to protect her image, managing conditions on set rather than confronting the problem directly. Costumes were rotated, sets were ventilated, assistants quietly adjusted schedules. Clara's stardom was too valuable to risk over personal discomfort. The whispers never made it into fan magazines, but they lived on in dressing rooms and behind sound stages. Despite everything, her popularity survived. Audiences adored her energy, her charisma, and her unapologetic presence. The rumors never fully disappeared, but they never eclipsed her fame either. Clara Bow remained a symbol of the era, messy, electric, and unforgettable, both on screen and behind it. Mae West. Mae West approached scent the same way she approached everything else in life, with boldness and complete confidence. She layered perfume aggressively, often in quantities that overwhelmed rather than concealed. The intention was control, not subtlety. Under hot lights and restrictive costumes, sweat was inevitable, and West chose to mask it rather than prevent it. The result was overpowering, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. Crew members remembered it long after productions wrapped. Whether intentional or simply accepted, the scent became part of her presence. Mae understood the power of sensory impact. She didn't aim to blend in. She aimed to dominate a room. Mae West. Mae West approached scent the same way she approached everything else in life, with boldness and complete confidence. She layered perfume aggressively, often in quantities that overwhelmed rather than concealed. The intention was control, not subtlety. Under hot lights and restrictive costumes, sweat was inevitable, and West chose to mask it rather than prevent it. The result was overpowering, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. Crew members remembered it long after productions wrapped. Whether intentional or simply accepted, the scent became part of her presence. Mae understood the power of sensory impact. She didn't aim to blend in. She aimed to dominate a room before she ever spoke. Directors never questioned it. Co-stars adjusted. Hollywood learned to associate her entrance with more than dialogue and silhouette. The smell lingered, just like her influence. It was bold, unapologetic, and unmistakably Mae West. Even those who disliked it never forgot it. Bette Davis. Bette Davis cared about one thing above all else: the work. Comfort, refinement, and appearances came second, if they came at all. Exhausting shoots, emotional intensity, and long hours left little room for concern over physical upkeep. As fatigue set in, odor followed. Coworkers noticed, but no one dared confront her directly. Instead, jokes were made quietly, shared only among crew members who understood the hierarchy. Davis was respected, feared, and indispensable. Directors tolerated everything as long as the performance delivered, and it always did. Hygiene was never prioritized because it didn't matter in the final cut. What mattered was the scene, the emotion, the truth she put on screen. The discomfort existed, but it was overshadowed by her talent. Hollywood remembered Bette Davis for her performances, but behind the scenes, there were memories that never made it into biographies. Gloria Swanson. Silent-era glamour depended almost entirely on illusion, and few stars embodied that illusion more completely than Gloria Swanson. On screen, and in publicity photographs, she represented refinement, luxury, and impeccable style. Behind the scenes, however, reality was far less polished. During the silent era, studio economics meant costumes were reused constantly, sometimes worn day after day, with limited laundering in between. Swanson's elaborate gowns, heavy fabrics, and tight construction trapped heat under powerful lights, especially during long shooting schedules. Over time, odors inevitably built up. Technicians noticed it first. Wardrobe staff did what they could, airing garments whenever possible, but there were limits to what could be corrected without disrupting production. Complaints were never made openly. Swanson was far too important, far too valuable to be confronted over something so personal. Instead, frustration was managed quietly, shared only among those working closest to her. Studios were careful to protect her image, at all costs. Nothing was allowed to reach the public. The scent never followed her into fan magazines, premieres, or carefully staged publicity appearances. It remained confined to dressing rooms and sound stages, existing only in the memory of crew members who experienced it firsthand. Glamour survived because it was designed to. Reality stayed hidden, sealed behind the camera, where illusion mattered more than comfort, and silence was part of the job. Hollywood loved perfection, but it tolerated a lot to maintain the illusion. These stories were never meant for publicity, only whispered between takes and remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. If this glimpse behind the curtain surprised you, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories the studios preferred to forget. And tell me, did classic Hollywood seem a little less polished today?